So I'm here with Professor Wellington, the Dr. Wellington, and we are going to interview him onto a blog spot that we have on internet. So, how the communicative competence helped you to learn foreign languages?
Okay, so in the very beginning, I started learning with. I didn't start learning with communicative approach, right? In the school I enrolled when I was a teenager, they used the audiolingual method, so it was behavioral. Right? There was lots of repetition in the classes. We used lots of pictures, repeating the model from CDs. At the time, they were tapes, not CDs, right? And I got in contact with the communicative competence much later when I was at the university, for example. But helped me anyway because I could see that with the audiolingual method, I could speak fast, for example, but creativity came with the communicative competence. It was like I remembered all the sentences that I used to study in class with my teachers, but it was difficult to use creativity when I had to use the language in situations where I had to use unexpected language. Then I got confused and it was problematic. And with the communicative approach and communicative competences, I felt as a student that I could, for example, adapt what I had learned before to unexpected situations, like talking to people and knowing how to express myself without having to follow the structure or the models that I had repeated so much in class.
Where does the communicative competence could improve in regular school?
I think it's a very complex subject. First of all, because the objective of schools should be prepare students to communicate in a foreign language. That's why we try to learn in the first place a foreign language. Most of us, when we talk about learning a foreign language, we think that we're going to learn it to communicate in that language. Unfortunately, that's not what happens in regular schools. We still see the grammar translation method being very much used, right? And the result of that is that students in the end they can't speak the language, they can't communicate. It's a cause for frustration for many students because when they finish regular schools, they have studied English for so long, and in the end, they just realize they can't say anything. So it's very frustrating for students. I think it's frustrating for teachers too because they work with that language and trying to develop the abilities for their students, and at the same time, they realize the students don't learn, right? Changing the situation is something very complex because it's not just saying, okay, let's start with the communicative approach, let's start developing communicative competence with the students, because we have, I would say, lots of factors that can interfere with that, right? One of them is the way people see language learning and language teaching. There is still that belief from teachers and from students that we don't learn English in schools. That schools are places to learn grammar, about grammar, and if you need to learn a language, then you have to go to private courses, not schools. And it's a common belief shared by students and teachers alike. So that's one of the problems, right? So it's on the same time, it's very comfortable for some teachers and students to continue working with grammar, because imagine teachers who work only with grammar, they don't really need to develop other skills. Sometimes you don't need to have other skills like speaking the language, right? And it's simpler if you have bigger groups of students in the same classroom, because communicative activities demand lots of different approaches and different activities. You need to have pair work, group work, you need to bring extra activities, different activities to the students and so on. So sometimes it's also complicated for most of the teachers, especially when they don't have resources at home or at school, I mean, right? And at the same time, it's complicated because the whole structure of regular schools emphasize the use of grammar in language classes. Still, teachers who have preparation at the universities to teach using communicative approaches and communicative language teaching, they still work with grammar, most of them. So I think there are lots of factors that can interfere with it, and changing it is not so simple or as simple as we think. We still need to have lots of reflection on that. At the university, we try to change the minds of the students, but sometimes what we notice is that when they start working at regular schools, they continue doing the same thing on and on and on, even though we have discussed that for a lot of time at the university. So it's something very complex to change these
Last
habits.
question is, how do you apply communicative competence in your classroom?
Okay. So at the university we have different kinds of classrooms, different kinds of classes. We have, for example, more theoretical classes like linguistics. I'm a linguistics teacher. So when I work with linguistics, the objective of the subject is to study linguistics theory. So in that case, I must confess there's no place for communicative language teaching because that's not the objective, right? Even though the subject is given in English, right? We teach linguistics, especially for the English students, in English. But the objective is not to make students master the language, master the theory for linguistics in English. So in those subjects, generally, the classes don't focus on communicative language teaching. But on the other side, we have subjects like integrated abilities. With integrated abilities, then, the objective is to make students able to speak and to use the language. So in those situations, then I at least follow the communicative approach a lot, right? So in my classes, we have lots of communication activities. The students have to interact with each other all the time. I have lots of group work, pair work. Sometimes they have to interact with me. They have to talk about things they think, about the feelings, and do lots of things like describing situations and people, and it depends on the topic we are discussing, right? But in those communicative classes, we have lots of activities devoted to make students to talk using the English language. That's for those classes and those classrooms in which the objective is to develop oral abilities and other abilities with the use of the language.
Thank you very much, Professor Wellington. I think that we are going to make a good job right here, and thank you so much for all of you. Bye. Onde no sentido de que assim?
Agora? Aqui ou lá fora?
Is it with video, just audio? What is it?
A movie. Isso, é a primeira, é essa.
How the communicative competence helped you in life to learn a foreign language? Okay. Improve in regular school. Help you. Que deve ser.
Além, gravando.
Sorry, I just got confused.
Okay, again.